So hi, welcome to the fifth workshop in the series on technology commercialization. And this workshop is going to focus primarily on founding a startup company around your technology. So we'll start this journey where you already have an invention, a solution that solves an unmet need. You worked with your technology commercialization office to protect it, and together with your technology commercialization office, you have decided that the best way to put this technology on a path for commercialization is by forming a startup company around it. Okay, so that's where we're starting today's workshop, and we're going to start with, so when you want to start a NewCo around your technology, what are the big questions and how do we think of it in steps of getting there? So first we start by defining the proof of relevance for your technology. Next, so then what is the value proposition for this NewCo? What will the operations of this specific startup to take this technology out need? How will you secure the funding you need from investors? And at this end of the slide presentation, we'll have a workshop. You can play the role of the VC, investing a potential technology in a startup and evaluating it. All right, so let's start with defining proof of relevance for your technology. So what you really want, you want to prepare a statement about your technology, specifically how will your technology get adopted, right? And right away, you want to know what your technology does. For example, it treats diabetes or treats stroke. But right away, you want to be able to define why it will get adopted, namely by defining how it is different from others. From, is it more effective? Is it less expensive? Less toxic? Less invasive? And what is it got a different addressable population? So how is it different? And these kind of questions will answer and inform exactly what is the product profile based on your technology. And to really get there, one of the other things as you define this relevance is to understand what is the competition that your product profile will fit in. What's the pipeline, other technologies that have either been developed in development or have been abandoned. For example, if it's stroke, you really want to think about what are all the other technologies that have failed, why they failed, and why is yours going to be different and a reason to invest in. Okay? So what's your story? Is it totally new? Nobody thought of this pathway and target before? Or has it been told before, but you have a new angle, something different? And how dense is the competitive space? What's the pipeline look like when you think about maybe it's a drug for high blood pressure? How many other drugs already exist? What's the standard of care? How much is the unmet need? What's the competition? And as you define this proof of relevance statement, what are the tools you use? How do you gather information? How do you define your pitch? These are some of the websites that our group, especially RES, likes to use. Some are government websites with public information, like clinicaltrials.gov. There is, for what is the current standard of care, clinical information from a website called uptodate.com. And then there are a lot of business news, investor websites, information, in particular, Fierce and Fierce apps that are for biotech would be relevant. All right. So then you want to test the statement that you're coming up with, your proof of relevance, and how best to test it, then to define that product profile that you've come up with by testing it with potential customers and consumers. And when you think of your customer, if you're thinking about a startup that is a therapeutic startup, who's most likely your potential customer? It is going to be, your exit is going to likely be acquisition by a large pharma company. So that's your customer. So work with your technology commercialization and investment groups like RES's group to understand what is the feedback that you're getting from the potential customer as you're defining your proof of relevance. You also want to talk to who are the consumers, the key opinion leaders, the clinicians who will be using that product or prescribing that product. Okay. Basically, you're trying to answer the question, if you build it, will they come, right? That's your proof of relevance. You're trying to build a startup company. You're trying to build a product that you want to sell. Okay, so now let's think about, you have your proof of relevance. Let's think in terms of what's the value proposition of this NewCo? How much value will the company bring back to the investors who invest in creating this startup and funding it? So one way is to estimate the market size. That's definitely one method. So if it's a diabetes drug, the diabetes market, so you would do that. But there are challenges with coming up with a number there because you do need to dissect the numbers based on all products will require a timeline to penetration, adoption, competition. There's a lot of variables, not just the big market number, that the market size in 2012 will be so many $1 million. A better way, an additional way to do it is to actually benchmark it compared to recent deals done in the last few years that are for similar products in similar space. That's the best way to benchmark what will be the value of your company, what has exited recently that was in the similar space. This helps you really predict what the value of your product's going to be when you exit. The better you know it as you're working with VCs, it helps pitch what's the value for them to invest in your NewCo. Okay? You don't want that my product timeline and what it is, it's going to be take $200 million to get here, and the market is $225 million. That might not be a good value proposition for them, right? 10 years, risking their money to not make enough of a return of an investment. You look at the whole deal structure, right? It'll say $300 million, okay? But some of it was upfront for the product you're offering. The rest of it might be for the whole enterprise you've created, and it might be tail-ended. So let's say a pharma company bought a startup company, it might say for $300 million total deal value. Might be $25 million up front. That's what the investors got right off the gate. And the rest might be after phase 3. If you still make a product, you'll get royalty or you'll get a big milestone payment. And so the total deal value will be written, but it's important to work with experienced folks and try to look at the structure and how the deal is valued, and then tells you the value proposition for your product, where you think you're exiting, at what inflection and de-risking point, and what is the value of the total enterprise that you think you're going to sell. I would say every 5 years, models change, economic climate changes, how VCs have modeled their funds change. So you want to, it's not static, it does change, but roughly right now, if I were to tell you, if you want to do a NewCo around a therapeutic, you likely have to take it to a phase 2 to really create that value inflection point for your customer, which is likely a big pharma. Whereas if you're a device company currently, you're probably going to have to get to where you have a device that you are already selling in the marketplace to show that it can be sold. And then a mid to large size device company will buy you out because now they have the distribution channels and the salespeople to actually generate revenue over what product you have created, taken it to a 510K or a PMA, whatever is needed, and actually made some sales. Right? So it's after revenue versus therapeutic. And diagnostics tend to vary a lot, but they tend to be a little more like devices. You have to go further along and show that you can actually, their customers, end users to whom you can sell it. So these 4 questions that we're going through, we're not yet where it's a funded NewCo. What you have done is worked with your tech transfer office and with a group like we have, an investment group, to say, all right, so we've decided for many reasons, the Covidians of the world are not ready to take our technology, it's too early. How best to put it on a commercialization path? Maybe let's see if NewCo makes sense, and we think it does. But to really articulate that, to get it funded, to define your plan, to hire a CEO, to bring people around this idea, you need to be able to articulate through this. What's the proof of relevance? People will use it, it's needed. what is the value proposition? If it's going to take me 25 years and $25 million and I'll make sales for 50 million, nobody's going to fund it. So we need to be able to define those, work through the process, and that's why it's important. So this is before. This is theoretical, but you're working through all the potential roadmap that you need to go through. And so in fact, the next step, so when we think about the value proposition for this NewCo before you go to investors, one is this is going to address this kind of market size. We know the value today for a drug or a device that will address this kind of population based on apple-to-apple past deal comparisons is this. And if you can invest X amount of money for X amount of time, we'll probably make this much because that's what current product deals in the past have looked like. And so that brings us to that same part of value proposition. You have to estimate how much money and time you will need to get to that product, that exit point for your NewCo, because you're thinking about the value proposition for the investors for that exit, right? And so for that, you need a high-level plan to understand. This is your product development roadmap, basically. You want to understand what will be the go, no-go decisions, right? You have to understand that financing will be tranched. So what are those milestones, developmental milestones, de-risking steps, in value creating inflection steps that the financing model is based on? And so you need to define those benchmarks, what those developmental milestones would be. How long will it take to get there? Making a plan that says, I'll get to proof of concept in man within 2 years when, depending on the space you're in, the kind of animal models you'd need, it has to be benchmarked against what it costs to do in relevant industry in terms of time and money. Right? There are things that you cannot, so you identify what are the risks and what are the opportunities so that you can create this budget, a project management chart, how much time, how much money, what are the steps. And there will be things you need to build variance in the budget. For the biggest example is for regulatory, especially if you're a device, whether you're going to go through a PMA or 510. If you haven't had that conversation with the FDA, maybe it's in that space an evolving conversation right now in the FDA world. You might think you need a PMA, you might build out your budget for a PMA, and you might luck out and you need a 510K. So you can build some variance for that. There are things you cannot build variance for because you can't predict some of the technical hurdles you might end up with. So you have, this is a good opportunity when you do the roadmap to be aware of what might be the risk, where you can build some variance and define your value proposition and budget and time and money. So this helps you understand, what will it take to get to the finish line. So it's also critically important as entrepreneurs, founders, tech transfer people, VCs are going to come together to understand and have an estimate, because it's an estimate of what the company's current value is, right? Valuation is very based on lots of factors, but it's market driven, and there's some about demand. There are 10, if your idea is in product is so hot and there are 10 competing investing firms ready to invest, your valuation will be a little higher. But there's a fair market valuation that you have to think about and get advice on some other market comparables that exist for your kind of company, technology, the stage at it, what it's addressing. And there'll very likely be some difference of opinion between the group, the VCs, the entrepreneur, as to what that value is. And you have to be prepared and ready to be able to bridge that gap before you reach that exit and product. Today you're bringing together this piece of IP, this knowledge, this entrepreneur who's taken 2 companies to market. What is the current valuation, pre-money valuation for this company before the VCs have invested real money? Right. And this is all addressing the gap that may exist. And it's really the world we live in. A lot of our companies are founded are early stage, and defining that valuation is challenging. we worked with multiple VCs and multiple technologies ranging from diagnostic, therapeutics, devices. So we've got a good sense. We keep up with what's going on in the different models and the economic climate to know what models are working, how to think about valuation, what are the inflection points. So we can help bring everybody together and maybe be as creative as we can on the specific ideas that might bridge the gap. So let's get to that. So what will this NewCo's operations need to look like based on what you've defined, your proof of relevance and the value proposition, right? So definitely you need, if the more experienced entrepreneur, the more experienced seed funding group you have in your tech transfer office, an experienced startup team is important. And the operations team, I think the important thing to remember, it will change over time. It should, as the needs of the companies change. And so you might start off with an interim CEO, the one that is going to be able to pull the early stages together. And even from CEO on down, the team can change and should change for the different needs of the company. Maybe depending on the company, the initial focus is more on the proof of concept and technology, prototyping, etc. Later on, it might be more about an effort on biz dev, and you might choose whether you're hiring initially as consultants or bringing in a full-fledged team as employees. So your operation team, having experience there is important, but also knowing that that'll have to change as you go down your product development roadmap. Academicians work with the startup companies they found first as a founder, but they actually work and interact with the company more on the scientific advisory board. There are very rare examples where we have an academician who actually leaves the institution to actually go join the company as a full-time employee or run it. And we do have a couple examples, but that means you're leaving your academic career. And so actually I want to say a little more, because for most of the academics, it's the scientific advisory board. A good company does want a robust scientific advisory board that includes the original founder and the inventor, but also has other complementary subject matter experts that can be objective and well-rounded for what the company needs. And that will change as the company goes more from a science company to a very product development company. So your role on the scientific advisory board over time may lessen, right? And one other thing, that's, whether you choose to leave or not, there are good reasons people don't. It's a different skill set. It's not the career path. But for some, they do. It's something that they're young enough. They did it. They were MDs for a little bit and chose to really want to drive their passion for whatever solution they found, their technology, go with it. But and you can join the company, depending on the company, the investors, as a CSO, et cetera, differently. But this is where, even on the scientific advisory board, that's the most common way, partly also because of one other thing that triggers in here, and it's slightly different for each institution, is the conflict of interest, right? So if you're going to typically, if you're a founder on the SAB for a startup, you take equity in the company. And so that triggers some conflict of interest in what kind of roles you can play. So at Partners Healthcare, you cannot have fiduciary responsibility and cannot be in a company, and that's why you can't do both. You can't be an academician and take on a role in a company that is like a CSO or a CEO.
Oh, so you would actually have to.
So you always want to think about, you're raising the capital from VCs, you have a product development roadmap, so what would be the most efficient use of that capital you're going to raise? And the two big questions there is, for your product development roadmap for the NewCo that you're creating, the big question is it going to be a virtual company or a bricks and mortar company? And when we say a virtual company, you'll still hire a few people, but it'll be a handful of people. The space that you rent and that you need will be more like office space, versus a bricks and mortar company. That would be many people, probably scientists, probably wet lab space. So the enterprise looks very different, whether you're going to do a virtual company or bricks and mortar. And that really comes to, what are you trying to get to in your product development roadmap and efficient use of your capital. Ways to think about efficient use of your capital is also think how you could leverage collaborations with, let's say, CROs and other for-profit entities that might work with you in contingency basis, might share the risk with you now and do discounted rate work with you for an upside later on. So that's efficient use of capital based on how much you raise and where you need to get to in your development inflection points. And from our system, we have examples of both companies that have successfully gone down their product development roadmap as a virtual company, and you would say Sparrow fits in that bucket, the workshop we're going to do today. And there's some bricks and mortar company that Rez and I have been involved with, like Editas and Rana Therapeutics, which are big platform companies, therapeutic companies, driving from early stage platform to products. Right? So it just depends on the technology and on the NewCo and what your roadmap looks like and what capital you need to raise. Okay, so then let's get to, all right, you have your proof of relevance, you've defined what the value proposition is and what your roadmap and development map is going to look like. And so now you have to secure this funding. So to do that, you do want to assemble this pitch deck, which is now informed with the last three things we talked about. And you want a variety of pitch decks on your computer. You definitely want one that is the short deck. That would be, it's a primer and should not have much confidential information in there, because the idea is when you want to first pitch it to a VC or have something to talk about, you don't want the barrier to be high. You don't want to have to sign confidentiality agreements, etc. You want to first decide, give them enough, it's a, you know, like a teaser with enough information for them to say, yeah, we're interested, we want to know more. And then you would sign a CDA. You'd have a longer deck, a slide deck that actually tells your story, gives some detail, give all the relevance you need to convince them of what the roadmap's going to look like, what the value proposition is going to look like. All right? And I think rule of thumb, Rez said, if you want to think a short slide deck, under 10 slides. Okay? And the long slide deck, that just depends on the story you're trying to tell. All right, so the next step is then you want to match the opportunity, whether it's, you know, a device that's early stage, what kind of market it's going to address, is it niche? So the opportunity and the stage of development with the right investors, right? And in this area, again, there are investor VC groups that we work with, like Third Rock, Atlas, what else am I missing? Flagship. They really work in what we define academic early stage opportunities, which would be they are more than a year from any kind of clinical space. Then the preclinical space, they're 1 to 5 years away from the clinic. Even in the early stage, what's late stage is when it's just less than a year to the clinic. So the different VC groups that focus on investing in different kind of opportunities. So once you've defined this, you want to go pitch it to that right set of VCs that are interested in that space. So this is where what Rez had mentioned earlier, you want to be aware of some easy money offer. You have an entrepreneur with some money who's put it, come to you, and now you've divided up and valued the company, and now when you really go to pitch to a sophisticated VC, it just is a bigger challenge as they're trying to reassess what was the value, why is the division of pre-money valuation, who's who. So you have to be careful of easy money because it's maybe less sophisticated and might end up getting, when you hit roadblocks, might get easily spooked. You might have gone down a certain path and now you're left stranded with an asset that doesn't have support to go down further. Whereas big VC firms, the more sophisticated investors, they will do bigger, more diligence, more questions asked, but then in the long run, they make better partners because they're in it, because they've done all the diligence. All right, so, you know, it's not personal. They will do their diligence, so you need to be diligent and make sure that you're aware of and can anticipate what might be the weaknesses in your technology, weaknesses in the development plan roadmap that you've articulated, because especially the VCs, we talked about institutional VCs who do a lot of deals, who hear a lot of ideas and vet a lot of opportunities, they really will spot any inconsistency you have where you're fudging from where the technology gets from X to the development roadmap, either in terms of time and money it'll take, or gloss over some of the challenges, or talk about the challenges and then somehow still get to proof of concept in man in 2 years. You need it to be logical and be diligent about the story you're telling, right? And of course, you know, they are going to invest in your opportunity, they're going to evaluate, they're going to give feedback. So be prepared that your plan might have to change a little bit to adapt to what feedback they're giving to actually secure that investment they want to make. All right, so I think at this point, we'll shift to the workshop, which is about a company that was founded in technology out of MGH and is a startup company that Rez is going to walk us through the case study, and hopefully as part of the case study where you play the role of VC in evaluating it, see if you can define what the proof of relevance is, what's the value proposition, how do you think about the company's operations that need to be built, and the investment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.